Time now for what's on Rob's radar. And yesterday, something pretty remarkable happened in the city of LaBelle as a big thunderstorm dropped hailstones literally the size of ping pong balls across areas of Hendry County. That is something that is really rare in South Florida, even though we get a lot of thunderstorms over the course of the year. As you know, hailstones form with a thunderstorm like this. Major component of a thunderstorm is the updraft, air that's rising upward into the storm, and the downdraft, which of course would be air that's flowing out and away from the storm. Now, a hailstone forms when these little raindrops freeze because the air temperatures are much colder higher in the air. When the updraft is strong enough, it keeps those little frozen rain particles elevated in the air. And as they bump into other frozen raindrops, they become larger and larger and larger, and of course form into larger hailstones. Now, here in South Florida, from time to time, our bigger thunderstorms can give us some hail, but typically they're not very big. You know, most of the hailstones we see here may be about the size of a green pea or something like a Cheerio, you know, your breakfast cereal. But yesterday, of course, with those storms in Hendry County, the storms dropped some much bigger hailstones like the size of ping pong balls. Again, very rare because that's really large for South Florida. Other parts of the United States, though, they can get much bigger hailstones. Think about something like the size of a grapefruit. Imagine a chunk of ice the size of a grapefruit falling from a thunderstorm. Very unlikely to ever happen here, but in other parts of the United States, especially out west, out in the mountains, things like hailstones the size of grapefruit are a possibility. So what's the difference between a grapefruit-sized hail and a Cheerio-sized hail? Well, it all comes down, in part, to how strong the updraft is in the thunderstorm. The stronger the upward motion of air is in the storm, the longer and more prolonged these particles of ice can stay elevated in the thunderstorm. So in the case of a typical storm like we have here in South Florida during the summertime, those updrafts typically have to be around 24 miles an hour for them to produce hailstones that are about the size of Cheerios. Yesterday, of course, though, we had that ping pong-sized hail event, and that updraft, because those hailstones are so much larger, has to be a lot stronger. We're talking about an updraft speed of like 64 miles an hour. And the big ones here, once you start talking about grapefruit-sized chunks of ice, well, in that case, the updraft on those thunderstorms has to be closer to 100 miles an hour in order to support the weight of that giant chunk of ice. Now, you might be thinking, we get thunderstorms here in the summertime all the time. How come we don't get these bigger hail events more frequently? Well, think about the temperatures, especially here in Florida. It's really hot just above the Earth's surface. We're talking about chunks of ice. So even though over Florida, a hailstone might start as the size of a grapefruit, really high in the sky, as it falls closer to the Earth's surface, it starts to encounter some much warmer temperatures. So even though it might start the size of a grapefruit, it might be the size of a ping pong ball here in the lower parts of the storm, but by the time it gets to the Earth's surface, maybe it's the size of a Cheerio. So even though we get thunderstorms from time to time that can produce hailstones, it's very unlikely they get much bigger, and it's all because of the hot temperatures we tend to see so much of the year. And as we take a live look at our temperatures outside, there's a great illustration of that. Right now we're pushing 90 in Fort Myers and Cape Coral, upper 80s in Naples, and 91 outside right now in Bonita Springs. So if we had some thunderstorms outside there that were producing hail, you know, a lot of those hailstones would actually melt entirely before they get all the way down to the Earth's surface. But there's no storms out there today, and that's one reason why it feels so hot outside. It feels like 95 at the moment in Fort Myers and Bonita Springs. Feels like 94 right now, both in Cape Coral and Marco Island. As I mentioned, there's nothing to cool us off rain-wise this afternoon, and for the most part, that's how it's going to stay. Winds remain out of the south right now, keeping the humidity high, which also means if we even do see a shower or two tonight, it's going to float away from the coast and occupy areas over by Lake Okeechobee. So unfortunately, no rain to cool you off tonight as temperatures stay mild, upper 70s through 8 and 9 o'clock tonight, upper 70s through 10 and 11 as well, as officially your nighttime lows really only settle back into the mid-70s in most neighborhoods. 75, for instance, your nighttime low temperature forecast in Naples and Marco Island. Tomorrow, another warm and breezy day with high temperatures back in the 90s, but as you'll notice, there's signs of change. A front moves our direction on Thursday, and that should bring us a nice drop in temperature and humidity just in time for the weekend. We'll talk a bit more about that extended forecast coming up in just a few minutes. Christy?